Hello, and welcome back to the H2G podcast. Today's episode is part 2 of the Human Trafficking series. And just for good measure, Justin, it's recidivism. We are discussing the recidivism of people going back into trafficking situations. If you watched the last episode for the first, not last week, so we had spring break, but the week before, episode 1 of the series, we talked about, mine was mostly focused in sex trafficking. I know Richie touched more on labor trafficking. But I guess, I'll go ahead and start just kind of going into it here. The human trafficking issue is very multifaceted. So, a lot of times there's these organizations that put a lot of resources into rescuing people out of these situations, which is great. They're usually nonprofits that work very hard to try to rescue people out of these situations. But the main issue that after they're rescued out that they have to combat is recidivism rates. And one of the big issues that we've seen is a lot of times particularly in sex trafficking, the women that do get trafficked are typically younger. You see it with like runaways or people who get into relationships with men that are much older than them, or they simply were just coerced into it in one way, shape, or form. And so these younger women a lot of times are, maybe high school age, right out of high school, sometimes even younger. And that may be the only life that they know. That may be the only way that they know how to earn money. And I say earn money loosely because it typically goes to their pimp, and then they give them an allowance. So the issue that they typically see is that they rescue people out of these situations, but they have no skill sets. They have no way to go into the working world with a resume. Some of them even have rap sheets because they've been arrested before for prostitution. And so, once these organizations rescue women out, or men too, what's the next step? At that point, they're like, well, we got you out. Yay. But then what do? They don't have any other resources. A lot of times they may not have friends or family or people that, have been cut off from their lives. They could be addicted to drugs because their pimps got them addicted to it and they have no way to pay for those drugs. They don't have anywhere to live or any other clothes to wear. So it's a huge issue that some states have done a really good job of starting to open businesses that strictly are hiring women that get rescued out of sex trafficking. So I've seen, catering businesses or like food trucks or, even like doing like craft things where they're actually making things with their hands, and they go in and they teach these people how to do all these different skills to try and make them more marketable so that they can successfully transition out of a life in human trafficking into the real world. And I don't know, Richie, if you know a lot about this as far as the labor side, because like I said, most of my research and experience is on the sex trafficking side. Did you want to chime in? I don't know if you have done a lot of research.
Yeah, sure. I'll say this much. It's a little different in this sense. Ultimately, at the end of the day, with labor, and I'm going to refer to labor in the sense of, for the most part, immigrants. That's usually what ends up happening in terms of who's getting preyed upon through this. But it tends to be basically, they don't really ever leave it because they don't really have the choice, which I'm not saying, on the sex side of things, women do either. But my point being is, like, essentially put it this way. If the company they're working for gets like raided and then they find out that through international labor laws, what's going on, and that, there are illegals and things like that, well, then they get like deported back to their country. So from the labor perspectives of things, it's pretty hopeless in the sense of, once they're here working for whatever company, that's pretty much it, because most of the times these immigrants do not have a green card, do not have a social security. So they don't have an option. Like, there's no getting away per se, because at the end of the day, the only way they get away is to return home. And usually, again, the people who are being manipulated in these scenarios, as we discussed on the previous episode, are people who saved up years of their savings from their family to move out here to make enough money, or more money rather, to help their family back home. So they're not going to try to go back home because they just bet their entire life to make it out here. So I would say that the recidivism isn't really applicable because at the end of the day, once they're working here in that sense from the illegal standpoint, they don't have any options to do so. Like there's almost no path because again, most of these people are family people. They're not like single people. They're usually supporting their families. So they're not going to marry somebody, try to get legal and citizenship through that and things like that. So that's just not going to happen. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people do, but we're not going to talk about those people. And particularly in my field, it's very common that a lot of these laborers are illegally used and things like that. My company does not do that, but it's very common. A lot of manufacturing and a lot of how do I want to say this? Construction. I hate to say that because a lot of construction people can be like, "Oh, we don't do that." A lot of construction and a lot of manufacturing is where this tends to happen. And at the end of the day, it's common sense. If you can get a guy to do an honest day's worth of work, which is usually extremely over honest, you talk, and you can pay him like $10 an hour instead of the 25 that we would be paying, to a citizen, they're going to do it. And so, yeah, I think from the labor perspective, I don't know if this necessarily applies to the scope of recidivism because at the end of the day, it's pure entrapment. And there's really no option for them except to flee. So, and then fleeing is a whole nother problem, as we've discussed. And as Chelsea's mentioned previously, in any of these scenarios, usually they don't speak the language of where they're at. They're getting captured and they can't communicate. How are they going to say like, I'm trying to get back to Mexico and I'm in like Portland, Oregon, that's just not a thing. So a lot of this just tends to be once they're in it, they're kind of swept up in it for life unless the company gets reported. And if the company gets reported, then their job is gone and then they're sent back home. So I don't know anything outside of, the scope of the industry I'm in that sense. So I don't know about other tactics people use, but I will say this in the sense of what companies tend to do to get retention. I know this is kind of going a little off topic, but a lot of the times they like to marginalize people and talk about the company being a family. It's a very common tactic and predatory tactic, and we're family. And they use that to, they try to use your goodwill to their your emotions to that sense of like, well, I'm not going to pay you like family, but we are family, right? Like I wouldn't have my son do your job, but your job is important. And that's a common tactic, and that's a common way to get people to stay. And it's unfortunate because a lot of the times people tend to do that. People associate their own work ethic with the connotation of what they're referring to. And what I mean by that, because it wasn't very articulated well, is that they'll tell you, hey, I need you to work 80 hours because the company needs to do it. And if you don't do it, you feel like you're not working hard enough, right? Because, well, I'm being paid to do this, particularly to salary type, not necessarily hourly, but to salary in specific. So, well, I'm paid to work this, like hours aren't supposed to be part of it. I just need to work when I'm needed. And so even if you leave that company, in the back of your mind, a lot of people end up doing that, where they have this common misconception rather, that, I need to be working as much as I humanly can for the company, because if I don't, I'm not a hard worker. And I think that's something, what I would say in the recidivism blanket, where that tends to happen is people get manipulated by their companies so easily and so often, and they don't view it as, work is work. And I don't know how to say, like, I've always been a work is work guy, but I've seen, and my company does it. Let me clarify. My company is we're a family type thing. And the only thing like we're family on is when you pay for my hotel. That's about as far as it goes. So, yeah, work-wise and labor laws, and from the labor perspective, I don't really have a great answer for this, because I do feel like I said, that it's just such a one-sided show. So I can't really comment outside of that, Chelsea. I would say that, yeah, in the sense of, do people go back? Like, I'll put it this way. If a guy's company goes under, he gets sent back to Mexico, say he's from Mexico, he's going to try to cross the border again and do it again if he can. I'll say that much. But again, it's under the notion that the life is better. And I think that's what makes sex trafficking so disgusting, and even more of a topic that's more challenging, is that there are so many reasons why, like if it's the drug addictions and and those types of things, or like the helplessness that we're referring to with like the labor side of things. Like there's so many reasons why people end up going back, because it's just like they don't really feel like they have another way. So
yeah, and I think one commonality that I guess kind of comes to mind is dependency. I mean, with labor, it's because you're dependent on, I mean, you literally gave everything that you had to relocate to this country for work to try to make better money and be better. And they're exploiting that. And on the sex trafficking side, it really comes down to dependency that causes the recidivism rates, because they don't feel that they are independent. They don't feel like they have what it takes to be on their own. And so for one reason or another, and there's a whole list of them, they go back to the life that they are familiar with, even if it's not a good one, even if it's risky, even if they're not happy, because it's literally all that they know. There's unfortunately some level of comfort in that life because it is all that they know. And because that's their only way of how to make money, they end up going back to it. So I'll let either Justin or Tony jump in here.
Yeah. I found it very interesting. I missed the very first episode of talking about it, but I do want to commend, Chelsea for bringing this to light, because I didn't know what recidivism was. I didn't do a lot of homework on human trafficking or, sex-wise or labor-wise. And so when I started to look some things up, I found it very interesting about recidivism and what that meant in our prison system. And then I correlated that to what it actually means for trafficking. And, you had brought up, Stockholm syndrome. But the 3-strike rule is a product of recidivism, because they know that you're going to mess up, right? So they give you another chance and another chance. That has nothing to do with human trafficking. When you talk about human trafficking, it's more of the mindset of, it kind of sounds like slavery to me. You're in a situation and you depend on these people and they exploit you and your goodwill and your good nature to get whatever they need to get from you, whether that is sexually, whether that is physically, whatever it is. And you just, why? Why wouldn't you fight for your freedom? Why wouldn't you, try to break from that? And, it's because of the mindset that where are you going to go? What's going to be the next step? How am I going to, I'm here illegally in the first place, number one. Number two, if you're not here illegally, you don't know where you're going to go or how you're going to get there, how you're going to get back. They take heroin or cocaine or crack or whatever it is, and they put it in these people. These people have to figure out who they are, where they are, and be coked up, cracked up, heroined up at the same damn time. It's unfair, it's unjust, it's despicable. And while I was doing this research, to see that people are trying to make it better, just to show of hands real quick, I know I'm going off topic. Did anyone hear about the plethora of children that was taken and kept on the back of a truck from Ohio during 2020? Did anybody hear about it?
That happened down the road for me, didn't it? Right up here?
Didn't even know about it. I didn't even know about it. It's 2021. I just found out when I was doing the research. Didn't even know about it. The awareness needs to be heightened. I just found out, Richie, that California is actually the number one state for human trafficking. Would have never guessed. Would have thought it was Texas. Really, I swear, that's just my ignorance. I would have thought it was Texas. The fact that we're having this conversation on the H2G podcast, whether it's outside your comfort or whatever it might be, it's definitely needed. And I'm thankful. And I'm not going to bring a lot of, the stuff that Chelsea and Richie brought, because I'm just now diving into it, and I'm fascinated and sickened at the same time, but fascinated and glad that I was able to do some of the research that I did, not just looking off of Google. Anybody can look off of Google. I watched the Jeffrey Epstein, and I know we're going to talk about this next week. I watched that documentary. Wow. Really? Are you kidding me? If you've not seen that on Netflix, if it's still on Netflix, you need to see it. Okay. I dropped down, hands down. I got my tongue tied. It changed my perspective of what human trafficking really is about. A lot of people, they don't even know what it is. Richie, you said manufacturing and construction. I would imagine that farming's a part of that as well. Part of the labor, I would imagine. There's just so much. The lawsuit from Starbucks that went on a couple years ago for the labor laws, that how they were actually getting their coffee beans. It's so much stuff I didn't even know about. Hello, wake up, smell the coffee. I want to donate. This is serious. Ashton Kutcher's doing a big thing, and I respect him. Just finding out some of the stuff that he's doing, it's absolutely astonishing that for so long I was ignorant to this situation. So I just want to commend everybody for having the testicular fortitude to talk about human trafficking. Justin, you can take it away.
Well, I'll be somewhat brief because you guys all have amazing points. And you said a lot of it. I will restate, we gave you one hotline last time we did this. We're going to give you another one. You've been seeing it flash at the top of the screen. But again, that's 1-888-373-7888. This one's actually to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So if you see it, know of it, stop it, do your part. What? I wasn't going to say it. Recidivism. Oh, did I get it? I got it there. Brings to mind for me that at least, geez, these guys are helping me out always. Thank you. I appreciate it. I needed you back in my sportscast days. It brings, so like we talked about the prison system and how that kind of can correlate. And we've talked a lot about what it means for both labor and sex trafficking. It also reminds me of some domestic violence situations. That's another topic for another day. Who knows? Maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. I don't know. We're on a serious streak this week. But domestic violence is something that I have personally fought and donated some time to help fight. And because I can't stand that exists. And so many women and men return to those relationships because like Chelsea had said, they don't know any different. And I think part of it, and these are some things to look for if you know someone that might be dealing with human trafficking or sex trafficking, or a victim of, I should say. While they're there to keep yourself sane, when you're in a traumatic situation, you have to come up with reasons, right? You have to come up with justifications within yourself to be able to continue. And those things can come so close to home. Not to repeat Chelsea again, but it becomes the only thing that you're comfortable with. And so I think it's the same thing with institutionalized individuals from prison, domestic violence, and then this human and sex trafficking. They have come up with all of the reasons to why it's okay for them to do this, that they don't know anything else. So my advice from my seat is to, when you do help rescue somebody, and we'll talk off the air before I officially announce this, but I believe we're gonna have a guest join us for part 3 who has some absolute firsthand experience. And that will be great, but I don't want to announce it too soon before I get the official okay on the date. She will join us on the H2G podcast. I just don't know if it's next week. But when you have an opportunity to help somebody that's been in this situation, you need to focus on making them comfortable in other situations, showing them that there are other ways to be comfortable, other ways to make a living, other ways to feel loved, attracted to. There's probably a list, a billion things long of rationalizations that people come up with to feel more comfortable in that life than they do in this clean slate. And I understand how that could be so scary to only know one way of living and then finally be set free into this crazy world. I've thought about institutionalization. Whew. My whole life I've thought about how that must be so crazy if you spent 20 years locked inside a room with a schedule and taken from one place to the next and fed 3 times a day, and then you come out and people are tweeting on their cell phones and there's hot dog carts and you gotta get a job, an apartment, and rent's now $1,200 a month instead of $400 a month, and all these things have changed since you've been out. It's just that kind of eye-opening would be terrifying, and I could see how that could send somebody back. And it's so sad to me that it happens in something as serious and as heartbreaking as sex and human trafficking.
Yeah. So one thing I think it was Tony who brought up Ashton Kutcher. Blake Lively is another one that does a lot with human trafficking. I was actually going to bring up some different organizations because I know you mentioned donating as well. So the shirt I'm actually currently wearing says "Be Free," is from a company called Sevenly, SEVENLY.org. And they do all kinds of different fundraisers for different organizations, not just trafficking related. But they sell different apparel and things, and part of the proceeds go to different organizations. So there's a lot of options for things like that. I usually will go out of my way to try to buy products or something that donates toward different things that I'm passionate about, including human trafficking. But just to name off a few here, Polaris Project is a big one. Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, Love 146. Love 146 is actually, they had one on Wright State's campus. That's usually an organization that has chapters all across the country. International Justice Mission. I mean, there are boatloads of organizations that you can volunteer for and donate to. There's local ones that are specific to the areas that you live in. There's women's shelters that specialize in getting women out of sex trafficking, and you can donate things. So clothes and goods and things that women would need getting out of a situation like that. You can donate things to those different places. They have a drop-off location. They won't give the address of where they house those women. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. I know I've personally volunteered. I work in digital marketing, so I've volunteered to do digital marketing for a human trafficking organization in Tampa for free because I have that skill set, and that's something that I can give to them in addition to going to their different events and trying to raise awareness. So there's a lot of different ways that you can help that's not just donating money or, physically going into rescue women out of these situations. Not advised. Do not do that. Richie, I think you had one other story you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I want to talk about a labor trafficking situation because we've been talking about it specifically, and I just wanted to do a story. We'll go with Ohio because this is one I found very recently. So 2018, PBS did a big whole thing with Frontline about this. Trillium is a farm, one of the largest farms for eggs, actually. And so there's a story of 2 young Guatemalan boys. They're 14 years old. They were paid $15,000 in exchange for their services, basically, right? So they pay them $15,000. They're going to move them out, and their life's going to be better. And their uncle, knew the HHS person. So the HHS person, and I say that in quotes, and HHS is the Humane Services. So it's Health and Humane Services. Now, basically what these smugglers do is they get somebody who works in these departments to represent them as their sponsor because they're children. So these children were then forced to work 10 to 12 hour shifts at Trillium. Now, Trillium was paying the smugglers, well, technically the boys, wages. It's not like they weren't paying them. But then the smugglers were taking the money saying, we're going to kill your father. You owe us money. $15,000 doesn't cut it. Look at your life. And they were putting him in these tiny little trailers. So now I could keep going into the story, but thankfully the smugglers were identified. And although I don't think criminally they were charged to what I would like, let's see here. There was a 10-year sentence. There was a 16-year sentence. And then there were 2 at 51 months. So to me, that's absolutely not long enough for what they were doing. Because between the years of 2013 and 2014, these gentlemen made $6 million off the back of these young Guatemalan boys. Emphasis on boys. The other thing is Trillium was not charged with anything, which sure, on paper, you could say, all right, well, they were paying them wages. Well, I think they would recognize these are 14-year-old boys who have no business, and like labor law wise, certainly shouldn't be working 10 to 12 hour shifts. So I don't know more details about the Trillium side of things, but clearly I just wanted to point out to you, like, look, this is how easily people get entrapped. This is how this happens. This is not just, grown men making decisions. Here's an example of children trying to have an opportunity, or their family paying money to give these children an opportunity to come into the United States for better education and a better promise for that, right? And so for people here who are born here with that luxury, that sit here and complain about why are minorities trying to illegally do it? Well, it's because they don't have another way. You like most of the people who say, oh, well, you can just come in the legal way, have no understanding of what the legal way is and how that process is involved, and how to attain a green card and go through citizenship. And again, like, these families were duped. They're $15,000 a piece. They basically saved up $30,000, most of their money, to get these boys an opportunity in America, thinking they're going to have the opportunity to go to work and go to a college in America and have a better life. And they ended up cleaning chicken shit out of coops for 10 hours a day. Like, let's be honest here. So I just wanted to mention that brief story and to explain why this is exactly why once human trafficking starts, it's almost impossible to escape. What would these boys do? Where would they go? They don't speak English. How could they possibly do anything? These people told their uncle they're going to kill their father, right? So their families, and Chelsea's mentioned this before, and this is exactly what happens in human trafficking on the sex side of things as well. They threaten their families. This is exactly how trafficking is. This is exactly what they do. So I just wanted to give you a specific story so you could understand that it's not as simple as somebody's just moving up here to work. Sometimes it's a complete duping, just like how sex trafficking is. They tell you something and completely fleece you, and then you have no way out.
Yeah, and I think that kind of also ties in with cases with sex trafficking too, because a lot of times it's kids that you see that are runaways. It sounds bad, but the younger that they can get them, the more malleable they are, the more easy it is to psychologically mess them up, to get them to think that this is their way of life and it's all that they have. A lot of times, with a runaway situation, they're running away from a not so great home life. So the traffickers will use that to their advantage and basically say, we're going to treat you better. We're going to provide you with this. What is it that you want? And they'll, basically lure them into the situation thinking that, this is going to be a better life. I don't need my parents. And then all of a sudden they're in a sex trafficking situation doing things that they don't want to do, but they can't get out because they're just a kid. And I don't know that you see it quite as often here in the US. You do see it a lot overseas, but sometimes it's even like corrupt police that are involved with it. There have been instances, I know at least in India, where somebody will get out, they'll manage to escape, they'll go to the police, and the police will hand them back over to whoever the person is. So just obviously you want to hope that a police officer is actually going to help you, but there obviously are, some instances where that's not the case. I think there's probably a lot of people in politics that could possibly be involved, at least in the monetary side of it. That's just my personal belief. But overall, I really want to reinforce that there are a lot of ways for people to, get involved and help, whether that's simply cleaning out your closet and donating it to a local organization, or, consciously purchasing products that have proceeds that go to some kind of organization, or you can actually physically volunteer. A lot of them do host different awareness events. I've been to candlelight vigils where they will have people come speak about their experiences in trafficking, and they do a whole event. There's really a lot of options, both nationally and locally, in order to get involved and raise awareness. Even just posting about these different stories, like the case that happened in Ohio, right down the street from Justin. You see a news article about it, share it. That's the only way that you're really going to get it out there more, because a lot of times you don't hear it being talked about on news stations. And we have a very powerful platform, and that is social media, to share a lot of this information. And it's something that I've been doing for probably about 10 years now. And I think it is really important because a lot of times I think the news shies away from something as complicated and taboo topic as sex trafficking. I wanted to give anybody else, if they had anything else they wanted to add, to do that now. Everybody good? Okay, well, just for reinforcement, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-373-7888. And I think Justin will probably have that flash up on the screen again so that they have it. And just do a quick Google search, look up organizations that you could get involved with, see what your options are out there. Watch some of those documentaries. As Tony mentioned, doing the one about Jeffrey Epstein is a good place to start, but there's a lot of different ways for you to learn about the psychology, the recidivism, everything that goes into this. So again, this has been the H2G podcast. Thank you for joining us for episode 2 of the series for human trafficking, and we'll see you next week for part 3.